A 17th century Mughal ruler has become a bone of contention in 21st century India. This is not the first time that Aurangzeb has been the topic of hot public debate. Only this time, the debate has become even more shrill and yes, violent. This week, there was violence in Nagpur in Maharashtra on a day that the VHP and the Bajrang Dal held protests calling for Aurangzeb's tomb near Shambhaji Nagar to be razed. A mob mainly of local Muslims turned violent as rumors spread of a holy scripture being burnt. All of this has come against the backdrop of a super hit film, Chhawa, which graphically depicts the torture of Chhatrapati Shambhaji Maharaj by Aurangzeb. So how does one locate Aurangzeb in contemporary Indian society and politics? We've been hearing from the Netas in recent days and weeks. It's time to focus on those who've actually studied history. Aurangzeb's contentious legacy is the focus of today's roundtable. Joining us today on this roundtable, Medha Deshmukh Bhaskar is the author, The Life and Death of Shambhaji. Professor Rameshwar Prasad Bahuguna is former professor, Department of History and Culture at Jamia Millia Islamia. Dr. Ruchika Sharma is a historian on medieval Indian history. Professor Mridula Mukherjee is historian and former director, Nehru Memorial Museum. Professor Makhan Lal is historian and author. And Shahid Siddiqui is Chairman, Interfaith Peace Foundation. I appreciate each of you joining us, and I'm going to come with one by one to the big questions I'm raising. First of all, is Aurangzeb seen by historians purely as a villainous ruler? Is that how we should see him? I want to get each of my guests to respond briefly to my top question there. Why don't you start off, Professor Mridula Mukherjee? Should Aurangzeb be seen as purely a villainous figure?
No, not at all. The answer is very clear. He was a complex personality, as most people are. And we have to, more than anything else, we have to remember the times in which he lived. We are talking about medieval times. We are not talking about modern 20th or 21st century. And I think what is very important is to put Aurangzeb in perspective. There is no doubt that Aurangzeb was no Akbar. He was not doing Sulh-e-Kul. He was not having, trying to come out with a whole new secular perspective. But in fact, there are various policies which were started by Akbar, which were continued by Aurangzeb. First and foremost, that a large number of Hindu nobility were there in the administration of the Mughal Empire. In fact, the proportion of Mughal nobility under Aurangzeb went up to more than 30%. Akbar had only achieved about 21%. Just as Akbar had relied on the Rajputs, very, very powerful Rajput rulers were his allies. He made marital alliances with them. That continued right through this period. And Aurangzeb also relied on Mirza Raja Jai Singh, for example, Jaswant Singh, for his whole Deccan campaigns. In fact, if you look at the history of that time, it is not a Bollywood movie of heroes and villains in which, the villains are the Muslims and the heroes are the Hindus, and Shivaji is the hero and Aurangzeb is the villain. Okay. It's a complex history. Aurangzeb
let me stop you. Let me stop you at that point.
To temples.
Okay, go ahead. Let me stop you where you say he's a complex figure and take that to Professor Makhan Lal. Professor Makhan Lal, respond. In fact, I stopped Mridula Mukherjee when she was making the point that Aurangzeb, particularly in the early period of his reign, actually gave monies to temple trusts as well. In the latter period, he also demolished temples. He's a complex figure. Should he be seen purely as a villain? Professor Makhan Lal.
No, I would not like to see him as a villain or as a hero. As a historian, I would like to see him what has been he described as in Masr-e-Alamgiri or in Fatwa-e-Alamgiri. Because when you judge a complex personality or simple personality, you don't give a judgment in the historical issues. Here is Masr-e-Alamgiri, which is his court record. And when court record says about his personality, about his deeds, I think we need not to go in interpretation beyond certain point. When we say that 30% of nobility was Hindu, well, sir, 90% of the military, police and bureaucracy during British time were Hindus, Indians. And never in history British were more than 62,000 and they ruled over 44 crores people. This cannot be criteria in the judgment of the people. If it was so good, why did you throw them away? Number one. Number two, anybody's personality has to be judged of a complex or simple, how he treats his subjects. When there is a discrimination in treatment, well, one has to accept that yes, he saw his people not with one eye but two eyes. Somebody has to pay to live a life that has been given by God. Jizya means you give for your living space. You are allowed to live so that you pay the tax. That is a discrimination. Also, it is a discrimination when Hindus, people are taxed twice, businessmen, and Muslim businessmen are not allowed to give any tax. They are just made free. So all I will say, I will not take much time. Temples are destroyed, not the mosque, not the Girjaghar, not any other things. And all these are his court records, not interpretation. I can read out pages after pages from this book, which is his court record, and therefore I will say very politely that he may have been a complex personality, but for simple laity, for common people, he does not go into complexity of the ruler. He goes into what he is doing.
Right. So for what he was doing, according to you, was
That's how I
pure
did not
religious,
want to interrupt.
the pure religious discrimination. From your perspective, pure religious discrimination. I'm going to go one by one. Dr. Ruchika Sharma, your view. Do you see him purely, should he be seen purely as a villain as he's now increasingly seen?
No, as a historian, I would see him as a king. And like all kings, some of his policies were good and some of his policies were bad. Since Professor Makhanlal has raised some important points, I think we should not only see Aurangzeb from Masir-e-Alamgiri. There are many other texts which also talk about him. There are many other inscriptions and farmans of his which offer a very different picture than what is popular today. Just to give you an example, there are inscriptions upon inscriptions on temples which say that Aurangzeb granted land to these temples. So for example, there is a temple called Gopinath Temple. There is an inscription 1699 which says Nonidharai was the person who got this temple built and the tank built under the auspices of Aurangzeb. He was the person who gave money to build that temple. It was a Shiv temple. We have Dauji Maharaj temple with a similar inscription saying Aurangzeb built the Nakharkhana and the temple. We have Someshwar Dev temple where there is a pillar called the Dharam Danda, which says that around 16 temples were granted by Aurangzeb when he visited Allahabad. We have many saints that he gave grants to. We have Ramjeevan Gosai. He was talking about funders. One of the biggest funders of Aurangzeb's empire was a Jain person called Shantidas Jawahari, who was given the grants of Abu Girnar as well as Shatrunjay, these Jain temples. They were all given very lucrative grants. In fact, we must also look at Aurangzeb through the lenses of the Jain texts. So there is a text called Brahmavilas, which was written around 1700 AD. There is a text called Padmanandi Panchavishika, which was written around the 1670s, both of which say that Aurangzeb was a very religious, tolerant ruler, something which we completely disagree with in the popular sphere today. But the Jains over there say that we were able to practice our religion, we were able to write about our religion in these texts under the aegis of Aurangzeb. So clearly, there is a very different picture which comes into the fore when you look at other texts as well and not just focus on Masir-e-Alamgiri. So I think it's a historian's duty to actually look at a holistic figure of Aurangzeb as a king and also talk about the policies which are quote-unquote good policies and not just quote-unquote bad policies as considered in the popular sphere. So I would not think of Aurangzeb as a villain. I would think of him as a king who had both good policies and bad policies. And it's very important that his good policies are also talked about in the popular sphere.
Medha Deshmukh, very interesting the way you put it there, Ms. Sharma. Medha Deshmukh Bhaskar, author The Life and Death of Shambhaji. You know, it is actually the manner in which Aurangzeb tortured Shambhaji, tried to force him to convert to Islam, which is part of both folklore in Maharashtra, and now increasingly through cinema, it seems, across India. Should he be seen purely as a villain?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, so I would like to just state facts from various books, whether he was villain or you can judge it. Like, it is not just the jizya tax, okay? It was another tax which was called khara, which was 50%. Those people who held the land in his empire and who cultivated it, because agriculture was the only industry then. And those who were non-believers were taxed 50% of their produce. And this is given in many books, whatever books, I do not want to show, there's a list of books here. So when 50% of the produce could not be paid, it is also given in historian Dr. Habib's book that most of the rayat or the agriculturists went empty on empty stomach because they had to give so much of produce, 50% of their income to the king, I mean to the revenue collectors of the Mughals. Now, the thing is, there are letters, several letters documented that from Aurangzeb, that if you cannot collect the wanted produce from these agriculturists, then take away their children and wives and sell them as slaves. So many, these are the letters available. So there may be a very beautiful monuments they have made, a beautiful palaces and the forts, but the rayat, the farmers, the backbone of the empire, they were an absolutely sad population, that time.
Okay.
And the repercussions of those are still seen in India.
Okay, I'll come. It's interesting how we are getting varying perspectives. Professor Rameshwar Prasad Bahuguna, former professor, Department of History and Culture at Jamia Millia. Should we see Aurangzeb as a villain? That's the initial central question I'm asking each of you as opening remarks.
Yeah, actually, Aurangzeb ruled for almost 50 years. And like Akbar, now over this period of 50 years, the policies never remained the same. Just now, it was pointed out that the land revenue demand on the peasants was very high and or different kind of taxes were imposed on the people. About 60 years ago, when Professor Habib's book appeared, Agrarian System of Mughal India, some people pointed out that one day his interpretation of the decline of the Mughal Empire could be misused by communalists because the rulers were Muslims and most of the peasants were Hindus. So that is what I heard just now. Unfortunately, the peasants belonged to all the communities, whether they were Hindus or Muslims. So there were no different revenue rates for Hindu peasants and Muslim peasants. Now, so far as jizya is concerned,
wasn't jizya specifically for Hindus?
Yes, but you see, why one may ask the question why it took him 20 years or 22 years rather to impose jizya. That is the point I am raising. That over a period of 50 years, his policies constantly changed. It's not that today he came to power, ascended to the throne and next day he imposed jizya. Why is it that some of his leading officers, his leading commanders were Hindus? I mean, including the one who was in charge of military operations against Shivaji, Mirza Raja Jai Singh, who was a Mansabdar of 7,000 Zat and Sawar. He was the person, Mirza Raja Jai Singh was the person who led Mughal military operations in the Deccan and was responsible for the Treaty of Purandar in 1665. So now...
so you're saying Aurangzeb evolved over a period of time. In fact, jizya comes in the second half, towards the second half of Aurangzeb's tenure, even as various revolts are brewing across the kingdom.
Absolutely.
As I said, okay. I take your point. I'll come back to you for more, Mr. Bauguna, in a moment. Shahid Siddiqui, your preliminary remarks. You're the sort of non-historian, if I may say so, but you've tracked this entire debate. So, is Aurangzeb perceived as a villainous figure? Should he be perceived as a villain, as a religious bigot, which is my next big question? Is Aurangzeb to be seen as purely as a religious bigot above all else?
Rajdeep, Aurangzeb was an autocratic ruler like most of the rulers in those times, whether they were Muslims or Hindus or others, and many of their policies depended on the situation which arose from time to time, and he was oppressive, no doubt about that. And let me tell you that among Muslims, he was never respected or held in any awe. I hardly find any Muslim who names his children Aurangzeb. Akbar, Shah Jahan, Jahangir is very popular. So he was not a very, very popular leader even among Muslims. And he not only oppressed the Hindus and others, he also killed some of the very prominent Muslim scholars. His battles in Deccan were also against a lot of Muslim rulers of Bahmani and other kingdoms in that area. So I'm not here to defend Aurangzeb at all. But the point is why Aurangzeb has become so relevant now. And I see a dog whistle in this. I see a effort. The target is not Aurangzeb or Babar or anybody. The target is the Muslim today. And therefore, to justify the attacks on Muslims, to justify their oppression, the excuse is an Aurangzeb. So what Aurangzeb did, if he demolished the temples, today you are wanting to demolish his grave, or you want to demolish some of the temples or of the mosques. So you are exactly doing what Aurangzeb did. So what if you do not stand on a high moral ground if you are taking the same policies. So the point is that Aurangzeb, like any ruler, was neither a villain nor a hero. He did lot of wrong things and good things, as most of the rulers did in those times, and even today in democratic times that is happening. So let's not judge Aurangzeb from the value system of the 20th, 21st century and target him and then use him to
I take
target.
your point. I'm going to come to how he's used as a political weapon, but that question, which is my second question, was Aurangzeb a religious bigot above all else? Mridula Mukherjee, a lot of the panelists in their opening, at least a couple of them, have focused on the fact that Aurangzeb used what were seen as a tax regime that was targeted, according to some, at Hindus. Others believe it was targeted against all farmers. How do you see Aurangzeb's rule, the religious fundamentalism, some of which has come across even in modern times because of a movie which shows the way he tortured Shambhaji towards the end of Shambhaji's life? How do you see Shambhaji Maharaj's life? Was he a religious bigot above all else?
I don't think the issue of torture and the execution of Shambhaji has anything to do with the issue of bigotry. I mean, at that time, Shambhaji himself, when he discovered the conspiracy against himself, actually killed, a lot of the Hindu nobles at the court, and including his stepmother, because they were rivals. I mean, those were the times. Salim, that is Jahangir, rebelled against his father, as you know, Akbar. And Aurangzeb rebelled against Shah Jahan. So, among Aurangzeb and his brothers, there was fratricidal, warfare. I mean, those were the times when that is how kingship was. I mean, Shambhaji and, his stepbrother, Rajaram, for example, they were fighting for the throne. I mean, that was so common. So I think the issue of torture and the execution and this and that, these only muddy the waters. That was the norm. If we go to Bengal, the folklore about Marathas You know, they don't have such words anywhere about Muslims or Mughals, but the kind of folklore that there is among the about the Marathas and their brutality, children were put to sleep telling them Marathas are coming. They were called bagdis. You know, so this is a very complex thing. I mean, to take up something like that and blow it out of proportion, as this movie I haven't seen, but I believe a very large proportion of the movie
I'll come to that part, but you don't see him, therefore, you don't see him as a religious bigot stroke fundamentalist. Am I correct? You see him as basically an emperor trying to ensure...
I'm saying there are differences. He is not a Shah Jahan, he is not a Jahangir, he is certainly not an Akbar. There are shades of difference among all of them. Akbar was an outstanding ruler. He had qualities, you know, which were exceptional. All right, it's like Ashoka, Akbar, these are our greats. Now, Aurangzeb certainly doesn't come into that category. First and foremost, he was very religious. More than bigot, he was religious, he was pious. You know the story about why he has such a simple grave. It's a grave covered with mud because he said 14 rupees and some annas is all that he earned by knitting caps. And that is the only money that should be spent on his, you know. He was austere, he was stoic, he had all those. Bigot to the extent, well, this is what medieval historians have told us, that after the first 20 years when the crisis of different kinds started to build up, he did also start leaning on religion in order to advance his political ends. But at the same time, you know, he was not against the Shias. There were appeals to him that you remove Shia nobles from your court. He said, no, this is a matter of administration. Now, a good bigoted Sunni cannot tolerate Shias. You know, so we have Iranis, Turanis, among the Muslims also different sects, different nationalities, all present at the court. You know, the story is so complex. Shivaji had here Muslim generals, Muslim nobility, Bijapur, Golconda. Shivaji and Shambhaji, all the time, they were either fighting with Bijapur and Golconda or they were allying with them. They were either fighting the Portuguese or they were using the Portuguese against the Mughals. If you actually tell the story of that period, it is a struggle for power where all people are using whatever they can. You know, and that is the essence of it. There are other things. I am not saying that he was a great secular, great secular human being.
Okay, he was no Din-e-Ilahi Akbar, but according to you, neither should he be seen purely through the prism of religious bigotry. Professor Makhanlal, you want to respond to that? It's interesting, the points that Mridula Mukherjee is making. Those were times where the medieval times were very different to our definition of who is to be seen as a bigot and who is to be seen as secular.
Fair enough. I think that when something is pointed out on the basis of the documents, in order to counter that, if you start raising the thing that he also did this, he also did, if, you know, by pointing out that he gave grants to this temple in Ayodhya, in Chitrakoot, and this is, does it exonerate him from destroying the temple of Mathura, from destroying Kashi Vishwanath, from destroying Pandharpur in Maharashtra, from destroying temple in Udaipur and Jaisalmer and all that places? Does it exonerate him from this crime? I mean, giving some alms to some temple is very nice act, but does it entitle him to do that? One of the best thing is, when we talk about Aurangzeb, talk as him as a political king, and then other with which he can go to war with anybody, he can do anything. But when it comes to people and subject, then he cannot be treated at par with the political power. After all, what was the fault of Guru Tegh Bahadur? What was the fault of, you know, Guru Gobind Singh's 9-year-old and 7-year-old son? Why they were done? Was there any political reason for this? And when Mridulaji says that he was very pious and very religious king, does it entitle him to destroy others' piousness? Does it entitle him to destroy the temples of other religions? Does it entitle him to levy the tax on the people who don't believe his religion? Answer has to be given for these things. And Rajdeep ji, Unfortunately, for today's situation, I hold the historians more responsible and followed by politicians. Historians' job is not to cook something which will be liked by somebody. History should have been written with the facts, with a very simple objective that we as an Indian must learn to live with history. This is history, we have to accept it. Don't hide away the facts. Don't live in history. What is this Teja Mela in Sambhal?
Okay,
Then in Saharanpur. Teja Mela, you know? I hope you have heard it.
Your
Teja Mela
essence-
is what? Celebrating Muhammad Ghori's victory on Hindus and Hindu kings. When you are living in 21st century, are you going back to 12th century? Sometimes these kind of questions have also to be asked. And number two, let me remind all your viewers, all the people listening, including historians sitting here, in Sikandrabad, considered the tomb of Akbar, we all know that when Jat rebellion took place, they dug out that grave of Akbar the Great. Where the bones are gone, nobody knows. Indicate the place here was Akbar's grave. There is a black flat stone. I think you have visited, I have visited several times for studies also. So many of the things have to be considered. When it comes to Aurangzeb, I am of very, very clear opinion that no monuments, monuments does not mean the, no monuments does not mean the grave. You may not celebrate him, you may not keep a road on him, but if I am left to, I will not think of destroying that grave. I will follow the example of Qutbul Islam Mosque. Put up a great banner there, quote Masr Alamgiri and Fatwa Alamgiri. Here lies great Aurangzeb, who levied jizya on Hindus, who destroyed so many temples, who killed this, who killed Govind Singh's two sons. People have to be educated about history, not to be taken for a ride with history. That's my very simple suggestion. We as a historian have
I've heard two very different perspectives at the moment. I want to come to you, Professor Dr. Sharma. Where do you stand on this? Was Aurangzeb a religious bigot above all else? We've heard from Professor Makhanlal arguing that historians are being selective and not looking at really the core of what Aurangzeb was all about. The killings of Guru Gobind Singh's sons, the Guru Tegh Bahadur, the jizya tax, and there are others who also talk about how Aurangzeb, as you said earlier, gave money to temple trusts. Was Aurangzeb a religious bigot above all else?
Respective king, it's very important to see if religion was the only thing that governed most of their policies. With Aurangzeb, that does not seem to be the case. Most of the wars that he has fought have not been just because the particular person was Hindu. In fact, most of the wars that he has fought were Rajput versus Maratha wars. So there was Udayban Rathore from Aurangzeb's side fighting Tanaji. There is Mirza Raja Jai Singh, as Professor Mukherjee pointed out, fighting Shivaji. He was the one who trapped Shivaji in the fort of Purandar. He was the one who got the Treaty of Purandar signed. So I think most of his policies do not point to religious bigotry. Professor Makhanlal made a very interesting point that should we exonerate Aurangzeb simply because he gave grants to temple. I would say don't. But then also follow the same idea for other Hindu rulers, because there were other Hindu rulers who also broke down temples, but also gave grants to temples. So I think it does not exonerate them as well. Will their memory also have this idea, which most people don't? For example, just to give you an example, Kalhan's Rajtarangini says that in 9th century in Kashmir, there was a ruler called Shambhaji who burnt an entire monastery called Jayendra Vihar. It was a Buddhist monastery, just to take revenge on one of his damas, one of his feudal lords, who was hiding inside the monastery. And then from inside the monastery, he broke the idol of Buddha and used it as a foundation stone for the new temple that he built, Shemagorishwar. It's a very interesting one-on-one. He destroys a Buddhist monastery and then gets another temple built. Now, are we to judge him as a religious bigot or not? Or are we to exonerate him building a new temple simply because, he has destroyed an entire monastery. So if we are going to do a one-on-one, I would say we do it for all Hindu rulers. And since the point of cruelty was also made, I think I'd like to make a point about Shivaji over here. Very few people know how he acquired the forts of, for example, Raigad, Johar Valley, and Javali. That was by very brutally killing the entire More family who were fellow Marathas, who controlled the forts of Raigad and Javali and Johar Valley. And all four the More brothers were killed very treacherously by Shivaji himself in order to acquire. In fact, most of Shivaji's campaign have been against fellow Marathas. So a lot of his brutality has been against fellow Marathas in order to acquire their Deshmukhis and their forts. So I would think that if we are judging rulers on the basis of their cruelty, on the basis of how many grants they gave or how many temples they broke, then we follow the same pattern for every ruler and not just single out Aurangzeb.
Interesting, because that leads me to my next question, and that is Aurangzeb versus the Marathas, which has become in a way the kind of binary that's put up. Was it a fight of Hindus versus Muslims, or was it simply about territory, about capturing territory? Medha Deshmukh Bhaskar, as someone who's written on the life and times of Shambhaji, how do you see that? Was were these fights simply about Hindus versus Muslims, or were they all battling for territory? The Marathas at times allied with the Sultan of Bijapur and Golconda, as has been already explained on this program. Aurangzeb also had Rajput generals. Is that enough for a reason to believe that these were not fights between Hindus and Muslims, or do you believe principally they were fights about religion or territory?
So the history is very complex, Now this the lady previously who explained about the Mores, that history is very deep, and the Mores were very cruel. And the time when Shivarai was going to attack Mores, Aurangzeb had attacked Hyderabad and killed 20,000 people. So this debate will go on and on. But what I would like to say, in 1403, one Ibn Falcon Khaltum, a historian and a scholar and a jurist, he divided, axed the world into two, Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. That means where Islam rules and where Islam does not rule, it is a battleground. And Aurangzeb came from that thought, And when there was a rise of the Marathas, it is not about Shivarai or Shambhu or Ram Raje. And somebody said there was a battle between Shambhu and Ram Raje. That person has to go and learn the history first. So when it comes to when Marathas rose against the Mughal, Aurangzeb, the bigot, he could not tolerate that an infidel can rise, because the entire ideology of the other infidels can change, and they will also rise against the empire. So you have to learn history.
No, but the same Aurangzeb, also took on the Sultan of Bijapur and Golconda, who then allied with the Marathas. That's also part of history.
I'll tell you why. Because he wanted their money. In the beginning, when he attacked them, when he was a prince, he wanted their money to increase his territory, to win the war of expansion. Later on, when he was older, when he came as a general Aurangzeb and fell upon Shambhu Raje and his little Swaraj, that time he could not take the Maratha hill forts. Even one small hill fort of Maratha, Ramshej, they took 2 years to win, So he knew that, and there were 300 hill forts of the Marathas. He would have taken about 600 years to win them. So he thought that if he can get the money from the Adil Shahi and rich Qutub Shahi, he can, actually he got 6 to 7 crores of rupees at the end of it, and he started bribing the Watandars whose power was reduced by Shivarai. It's a long
Ruchika, you want to quickly respond to what Medha just said? You want to quickly respond to that, and then I'll come to you, Dr. Bahuguna.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Rajiv. Yes, I would think that the Maratha versus Mughal warfare has got nothing to do with religion at all. In fact, when Shahji Shivaji's father, was taken as a prisoner, because there was some alleged conspiracy that he had hatched against the Bijapuri Sultanate that he was serving. Shivaji went to the Mughals asking for help, saying, I will give you my forces if you can help me get my father free from the Bijapuri Sultanate. At the same point of time, when the Treaty of Purandar was signed between the Mughals and Shivaji, which is Mirza Raja Jai Singh and Shivaji, you will see that 23 forts were given by Shivaji, and the 12 forts were left to Shivaji, that you can sort of govern them. In fact, between 1657 and 1659, when the Battle of Samugad was happening and there was a civil war happening between Dara Shikoh and Aurangzeb, Shivaji was the one who wrote letters to Aurangzeb saying that, I would be, if you can give me back my ancestral lands that Shahji once controlled, I'd be more than happy to give my services to the Mughal emperor, right? So, and then Aurangzeb wrote back saying, you'll first have to prove your loyalty to the Mughal Empire. Only then will you be allowed to be a part of it. So religion was never the reason as to why Aurangzeb punished. The reason why Shivaji had the Mughal Empire on his tail was because he had attacked Surat, which was the main port of the Mughals. So it was a completely political warfare. Religion had very little to do with the battle between the Marathas and the Mughals.
Yes, Ms. Bhaskaran, you want to respond? Quickly respond.
Yes.
Look at, for example, the sacking of Surat by Shivaji and how the Shivaji Maharaj and how that is seen.
It's not even once.
I want to respond to that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Because just before sacking of Surat, Shahista Khan, the Mughal general, had come into the Deccan with 100,000 people. And he had stayed put there for several years, destroying the entire revenue system of the Marathas. So it was Shivarai's decision that the Mughal have to pay what they have destroyed. Because when Shivarai came into power, he was a Zamindar's son. When Aurangzeb came into power, he had already 500,000 people, 200,000 well-mounted cavalrymen and 300,000 infantrymen and 40,000 artillerymen. Shivarai had nothing. He had to first establish. So when Shahista Khan destroyed his land, his revenue system, and he made his peasants poor, Shivarai said, Mughals will have to pay for the damage. And that is why the Surat was attacked.
Okay.
That's the reason. The history is very layered. It cannot be seen.
I think it's fascinating listening to all of you. It is many layered. Professor Rameshwar Prasad Bahuguna, do you want to add another layer to what we've just heard? Fascinating so far.
You see, you just spoke of Surat, and some of the richest merchants who lived in Surat were either Hindu or Jain. You see, without going into this specific question of whether Aurangzeb's religious outlook determined his policies or not over a period of 50 years, it's very important to know 2 or 3 things. One is that Aurangzeb was not able to understand the regional assertion in his time. The regional forces were emerging, and he explained, he tried to understand this regional assertion, whether it was of the Sikhs or Marathas or Jats, in terms of religion and not in terms of emergence of regional forces. Had he correctly understood their nature, perhaps he would have reached a different conclusion. That is why later historians like Jadunath Sarkar called it Hindu reaction, because for Aurangzeb these were religious upsurges, not regional. So that is one thing. So it is all imperial polity versus regional polity. Number one. Number two, when you ask the question whether the conflict between Marathas and Mughals was a religious conflict, I just give you one example. Shivaji's grandfather was Maloji, and Maloji, he had 2 sons. Now he was a great devotee of a Sufi saint in the Deccan, Shah Sharif Ji, and when these 2 sons were born, he believed that they were born because of the divine intercession of Shah Sharif. So the elder son was called Shahji and the other one was called Sharifji. So Shivaji's father was Shahji Bhosle. So you should understand this dimension. After Aurangzeb's death, this is the last point I am making. Shivaji's grandson, Sahuji, not only accepted Mughal Mansab, and not only he was accepted as Chhatrapati by the Mughals, there was a treaty between Balaji Vishwanath, the first Peshwa, and the Mughals. And throughout his life, Chhatrapati Sahuji remained as a Mughal Mansabdar. In the third battle of Panipat, the Marathas were fighting for the Mughal emperor. So, so this whole concept of perpetual Hindu-Muslim conflict, I think, does not hold much water.
Very, very interesting the way you all are putting it. That's why I said I think our politicians across the country should be watching this program just to understand the multi-layers of history as it exists. I'll come to you, Shahid Siddiqui, in a moment, but I want to come to the fourth question. How should we see, therefore, Aurangzeb versus Chhatrapati Shambhaji Maharaj? I raise this in the context because this is where the Chhawa factor comes in. The Chief Minister of Maharashtra says the recent troubles are linked to the manner in which Chhawa has angered people about Aurangzeb's torture of Shambhaji Maharaj. How should we see this conflict as well? Mridula Mukherjee, I know you haven't seen the movie, but the fact is that, you see, sometimes cinema also has an impact on people and how they perceive history. It's very easy in cinema to have heroes and villains. And the fact is, and this is historically proven, that Shambhaji Maharaj, Chhatrapati Shambhaji Maharaj was tortured. He was allegedly pressurized to force him to convert. He did not, and eventually died a horrific death. Now that is part of history as well. Therefore, that again now becomes one dominant sub-chapter in the 50, 60 years of Aurangzeb's rule, the half a century of Aurangzeb's rule.
The point is that it's not just about Chhawa. We know that in the last 2 years or 3 years, there have been a spate of such films, which are all geared to arousing communal passions in this country. It's not just films, it's happening in every sphere. So I would say that, in a sense, this whole debate is not going to get us anywhere. Was Aurangzeb this or that? I would, in fact, begin by arguing, suppose we were able to prove that Aurangzeb was the most obnoxious, bigoted, horrible, he was despicable. All right, what are we going to do now? Dig up his grave and throw it anywhere? Where is going to get us anywhere? I mean, is this how we deal with our history? Point, ma'am. We have, let me give an example. There are tortures which the British inflicted on us, like the Jallianwala Bagh massacre, like the massacre of the Maplas in the non-cooperation Khilafat movement. There were 300-400 of them put into a bogie and just left to die. There were other, the Kukas in Punjab, they were blown from the mouths of cannons. But very sensibly, the Indian national struggle, under the leadership of forward-looking people like Gandhiji, Nehru, Maulana Azad, said, we want to get rid of the British, but we are not going to hate them. We are not going to consider them enemies forever. We are not going to spend our time worrying about what happened in the past. We are going to look to the future, though we are going to criticize what the British did to us. And we are not going to make movies now in which we arouse passions against the British. Why aren't we doing that? Because it doesn't get us anywhere. You are not going to get votes by, making movies against the British, but you're going to get votes by making the Kerala story, the Kashmir files and all this. So this is nothing to do with history. I mean, my tragedy always is that all these debates, the historian today is become irrelevant because history has been taken over by the politicians and it has nothing to do with history. It's all about politics.
Which is my last question.
And
is Aurangzeb being used as a political weapon? That's my final question that I'm raising. But before that, Medha, since you've tracked Shambhaji very closely, Chhatrapati Shambhaji, do you see that period in a way as defining Aurangzeb's rule? Or as some of the historians are saying, that we've got to see it over a period of time?
Yeah, so when Shambhaji was brutally killed by Aurangzeb, what reaction today, what has happened, I do not approve of it at all. Okay. But in the 17th century, General Aurangzeb had descended on the Deccan with 500,000 people, 500,000 people, army people. That time, with a fire of jihad in everybody's heart. With the brutal killing of Shambhaji, when he actually bravely faced death, thousands and thousands and thousands of Marathas who had gone to the Mughal came back to the Maratha fort. May it be Brahmins, may it be farmers, may it be tribals, may it be Balutedars. Shambhaji's death lit a fire in their heart, and they fought so bravely after Shambhaji's death for 17 to 18 years that Aurangzeb was a sad old man defeated in the Deccan, and who could never win Maratha land, and that Maratha land was protected, So
I therefore have very limited. Just a minute.
Sentence.
Yes, just one sentence, ma'am. Yes, one sentence.
So such fire was lit that, as Professor Bahuguna just told us, the Marathas were back in the Mughal court in just a few decades. I mean, what's all this?
Okay, but 1 minute. Let's get back to, is Aurangzeb being used as a political weapon? I want to give 30 seconds each to all my panelists, starting with you, Shahid Siddiqui. You believe he's being used as a political weapon today?
Of course, today Maharashtra politics is changing. A coalition has emerged, which is very fragile coalition. And in order to keep the coalition going, they need a common factor to glue them. They need a common enemy to attack, and that is happening with the politics in the recent times, that they need a common enemy to unite their voters behind them. And that common enemy cannot be British anymore. That common enemy cannot be Pakistan. It's too weak. Now the common enemy can be a weak group, and the past history is the common enemy, but the target is the present voters who are not ready to vote for them or who are to be targeted, and the other voters have to be polarized in their name. So Maharashtra politics, that's happening. In Karnataka, you saw Tipu Sultan being villainized. In UP, it was Babar. So you find one or the other villain to unite your voters because you are not ready to do what you are expected to do.
And you believe you are using them to demonize today. You're using them to demonize today's Indian Muslims. Professor Makhanlal, is Aurangzeb being used? Okay.
Initially.
I take your point. Is Aurangzeb being used as a political weapon in your view, and is that dangerous according to Professor Makhanlal?
I am very happy with one sentence Professor Mridula Mukherjee spoke, and that was, today's history debate has been taken over by politicians and historians have become irrelevant. Wonderful statement, but let us say one thing, who is responsible for this? When you don't write history as history, you write as official history, you write as communal history, you write as secular history, where you are the judge, you are the pleader, you are the one who judges the judgments, then this was out to happen. Had the history been written in correct perspective, people of this country should have been taught what is the real history. History is a past. You have to live with past. You don't have to live in the past. People would have learned that this is history. Then there would have been no demand for removal of this grave. There would have been no demand for having a Teja Mela, having this Mela. That is, I hold historians squarely responsible, playing politics with history.
Dr. Ruchika Sharma, have historians
they have to face
Dr. Ruchika Sharma, have historians played politics with history?
Absolutely not. I think it's the other way around. Politicians have played politics with history. Historians have been crying hoarse, telling anybody who will listen, who will read, that Aurangzeb should not be judged along communal lines, which is what has been happening for a very long time, because it's a very convenient communal politics that happens for the Hindu right, and they constantly keep fanning this after some time or the other, whether it's the Mughals or whether it's the Aurangzeb, who according to them represents the epitome of this bad Mughal ruler and, temple destroyer and this villainous king, so on and so forth. I would think that Aurangzeb needs to be seen as a king. And as long as you're going to only align him with his religion, you are actually using him as a political weapon. Because if you are not aligning him with his religion, then his other facets also come into play. The fact that he gave grants to 20 temples, the fact that, Jains have a very different opinion on him. The fact that, there are Brahmins in his court like Chandra Brahmin, etc., who think that, Aurangzeb was a fantastic ruler. He's such a powerful ruler. And that he has nothing but respect for somebody like Aurangzeb, who's ruling with all his might and very efficient administration.
Yeah, but
if Aurangzeb was truly the religious bigot that most people tend to think that he was, he wouldn't have allowed after the Treaty of Purandar to let Shivaji work under him, actually asking him to go and control the fort of Panhala for the Mughal Empire's benefit, which Shivaji was not able to do. But well, he was working under the Mughal Empire,
I have very
as
limited
many
time.
Rajputs was.
I have very limited time. So, Professor Bahuguna, your final word on that. Has Aurangzeb been used as a political weapon? The fact is he's demonized today. He's demonized in a manner which is being used for political objective. Nobody wants to glorify him. I think that's very clear. I don't think it's about glorifying a person, but do you end up then demonizing him?
Actually, Aurangzeb has been used, or rather misused, for political purposes, not just now, but since the colonial times. This image of Aurangzeb was first created by colonial historians, then by some Indian historians like Jadunath Sarkar, who blamed Aurangzeb's religious policy for the downfall of the Mughal Empire. What serious historians have done in the last 60 years or so is to balance history writing and put forward a correct perspective on the decline of the Mughal Empire, where Aurangzeb is to be held responsible in certain ways, but he is not the only cause of his religious policy, is not the only cause, not even the primary cause of the decline of the Mughal Empire, and other serious factors, structural factors, social and economic factors come to the fore. So that is what serious historians. I do not know why Professor Makhan Lal is not happy with this new trend, because this new trend is trying to restore the balance. It is.
Let me give him. You made, all of you have in a way raised various points. I need to give Professor Makhan Lal a final word as a result. Professor, you've been rather critical of historians more than the politicians. I'm giving you a final word as a result.
My final word are for three people. One, the historians who should learn to write not balanced history, not disbalanced history, not secular history, not communal history, write history as a history.
Okay.
To the politician, please don't use history in your politics. Stay in politics the way you want. Leave us out, leave the history out. And to the people of this country, through you, I request that please learn from history, learn the lessons from history, also live with history, don't live in history. Thank you very much.
Very well put. Learn to live with history, don't live in history. I think that's a lovely one line on which to end, and I hope that our politicians realize that they are not historians. And when they choose to selectively interpret history to fulfill their political ends, then that is extremely divisive, particularly in a multi-faith society like ours with such a complex, long history. To all my wonderful panelists who've joined me, it's been fascinating listening to you all. I hope, just like all those millions of viewers who've been watching Chava, at least a few of you also watch this program intently and share it widely. Thanks for watching. Stay well, stay safe. Jai Hind. Namaskar.